Good evening to everyone, and thank you all for being here with us today. On behalf of Amity Institute of Liberal Arts, I, Ishika Desley, the student of BA Liberal Arts, is pleased to welcome everyone in this auspicious launch event of the Young Imprint magazine. Today, we live in a society where everyone is opinionated. We cannot tolerate the fact that mass media these days molds and subjugates the information to suit their interests. And this is where we stand different. Because we have created a fair platform with our magazine where people can pen down their opinions and thoughts, and readers can receive completely unbiased information. As we value your opinion, our tagline is Your Impression, Your Imprint. We understand the importance of the youth getting engaged in the deliberation and discussion of the happenings around the world. We even realize that may it be easier these days due to the constant influx of technology to assess the news, but we many a times fail to critically analyze the news in the way we are supposed to. And this is where we hope that the Young Imprint will be a great opportunity to all thoughtful minds. The journey of collective effort of our team in creating this magazine started around a month ago. And since the start, everyone has put in great amount of time, efforts, and creativity to endeavor the magazine that we will be unveiling today. Now, I would like to make few announcements before I move ahead. First, please, everyone, I request everyone to turn off their cameras. That would be really good to do. And the other is, after our session is done, there will be a round of question and answers, and I would request everyone to put in their queries in the chat box. So let's move ahead. Today we have with us Honorable Mr. Kumar Ketkar sir. Mr. Ketkar is a senior and renowned journalist. He was the chief editor of Dainik Divya Marathi and now is a member of Parliamentary Committee on External Affairs in Rajya Sabha. He has also been awarded by Padma Shri. We're really honored by your presence, sir. Thank you very much to give us your valuable time.
Thank you.
And I would like to take the event further by requesting Kumar sir to unveil the magazine and share a few words with us.
Well, actually, I'm very happy and truly delighted to unveil this magazine for students. I remember once I was a student of history, not exactly politics, but history and sociology. And we also did have a magazine, but that was an annual magazine. And I remember covering a little bit of politics, but later on I joined regular political journalism. And then I was a political journalist, and now I'm in Rajya Sabha. I am no more editor of the Divya Marathi that I resigned about 5 years ago. But I was chief editor of Lok Satta, I was chief editor of Maharashtra Times, I was in the Economic Times, I was in the Observer and many papers. But the point is not my autobiography, the point is our subject called politics. And since your magazine deals with politics, it is essentially political journalism or political commentary. Now it is necessary to understand that politics is something which is most people think very easy to understand, easy to opine about. Very many people always have their opinions about politics, about political leaders, about political parties, about political ideologies, about political situation, about political condition, local, national, or international. And everybody has opinion. Not every opinion is studied. We don't have such opinions about, let us say, physics. We don't have opinions about chemistry. We don't have opinions about biology. We have research on biology, we have commentaries on biology, we have disputes about biology, like particularly in this corona world, there are so many disputes in the scientific community which are going about corona. But the point is, this particular issue called politics, we have to segregate this subject into multiple themes. Like, what is the relationship of politics with economics, let us say? What is the relationship of politics with sociology? What is the relationship of politics with globalization? What is the relationship of politics with nationalism, the idea of India? So there are so many aspects closely interlinked with politics, including politics and science. So politics is an all-encompassing, all-enveloping subject. Politics is not something left only to the politicians, to Lok Sabha, to Rajya Sabha, to those who fight elections. No, politics is all-encompassing. Without politics, our life has at least 20% no meaning. You can be a literature, you can be a musician, you can be a painter, you can be a scientist, but still politics governs you. And that is why it is necessary to understand and to relate ourselves to politics. Good thing I like about this particular magazine when I gone through some of the things which were sent to me is that thankfully there is not much of cynicism about politics. There are a couple of sentences in some articles which were bordering on cynicism, but not much. And the point is, it is necessary to be non-cynical about politics, because the tendency today, not only here but in many parts of the world, is to under deal with politics. It is to consider politics as cheap, politics as corruption, politics as making money, and politics in general is treated with tremendous amount of cynicism and even pessimism. I think politics is not all that, or politics is maybe that, but along with that, politics is so many other things. For instance, can we think of a situation that no politics exists? Can we think of a situation that there are no politics, there are no political parties, there are no political ideologies, and the world, how will the world be governed? Politicians, not the politicians only, but the politicians along with the systems that the politics has created runs the world. Let us not underestimate the role of politicians and the politics in creating system, in running system, in sustaining system. And when that sustaining system collapses, you have anarchy or you have revolution. And anarchy and revolution, again, both are political expressions. They are also politics. So it is necessary to be not to be cynical about it. I can advise you students only take that one life when you go home from this particular topic or from this particular event. Don't be cynical about politics. Don't think that politics is all corrupt people. If you think politics is full of corrupt people, go and enter it and remain clean and actually run the political process, run the systems. There are good systems created. I'll just give you, for instance, a very, very simple historical reference. In 1947, India got independence. The population at that time was something like 35 crores. Today, we are nearly 135 crores. That means 100 crore more people have been added in last about 72 years. And what was the condition in 1947 when we actually got independence? We could make nothing on our own. And today, we can send satellites. We can deliver science, we can deliver so much of technology. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, when he gave speech, we have destiny. What does he mean by that? He meant that twisted destiny means we are going to make our own destiny, and that destiny is going to be made by people. I'll just tell you one simple example. Many people nowadays, it's a fashionable thing to say that nothing has happened in the last 70 years. Everything was a waste. And now only it didn't come naturally because of the generation. For that time, we had to fight. Several thousand people participated in Satyagraha launched by Mahatma Gandhi. They were arrested, they were tortured, they were beaten, many of them were killed, some of them were hanged, and yet the struggle went on. Nobody knew, let us say, when Lokmanya Tilak died in 1920, or when Lokmanya Tilak was fighting for it, nobody knew when the freedom will come. Lokmanya Tilak died in 1920. He did not know when the independence will come. Many people who fought for it did not even see the independence, did not see the light of that particular day, which was free India. Just one day before, 24 hours before we got independence, Pakistan also got independence. In Pakistan, almost for all these 70 years, out of 70 years, something like 55 years, Pakistan has had military dictatorship. Whereas India has never had military dictatorship. India always had a democracy. And that was because the foundation of our Indian democracy, Indian parliamentary democracy, was laid by Dr. Ambedkar, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, and such other people, including Mahatma Gandhi. But remember, immediately after independence, within almost 5 months or 5.5 months, Mahatma Gandhi was killed. Constituent Assembly was in session. Constitution was not ready. Constitution was being prepared. In 1946, Constituent Assembly was set. In 1947, we got independence, but independence came along with partition. Now, partition was not the plan which was discussed at all in 1946, though there were, kind of Hindu-Muslim tensions, but Hindu-Muslim tensions were not across the country. In some parts in the north, Hindu-Muslim tension was very great, very tortuous, whereas in south, it was relatively less. But the point is, it was Hindu-Muslim tension. But let us not forget that a large number of Muslim people did not choose Pakistan. They were offered. If you are a Muslim, you want to go to Pakistan, you can go. They did not go. Today also, if you look at the demographic map, you will find that there are slightly more Muslims in India than even in whole of Pakistan and whole of Bangladesh. This is because majority of the Muslims chose to stay in India. Now, there is a tendency, communal tendency growing in our country, as if every single Muslim is an agent of Pakistan. Every single Muslim is an enemy of the Indian Union. I mean, this kind of very narrow, very communal, very sectarian, very dangerous thoughts will lead to another partition if we don't take care. And when we got freedom in 1947, it was decided that we will be secular, we will be democratic, we will have parliamentary democracy, we will have secularism, we will have sovereignty, we will have liberal approach. We did not choose communism, which was a popular ideology then. We did not choose Hinduism as a foundation of our nation. Pakistan chose Islam as their foundation. We did not. Just imagine if we too had chosen Hindu as the foundation, the Hinduism or Hindutva as the foundation of India's freedom or India's constitution or India's growth, India's evolution, the idea of India would not have come at all. For instance, in Mizoram and Nagaland and in the entire Northeast, something like 65% people are Christians. They would not be easily compatible with the idea of Hindutva as the foundation of India. Forget Northeast, that's a large part in the Northeast. Take Kashmir. In Srinagar Valley, majority of them are Muslims. Would they be associated with a quote-unquote Hindutva nation? They would not be. Forget even that. There are so many other aspects of even say Dravidian culture. Dravidian culture that does not take so much pride in the idea of Hindutva as we find beyond Vindhyas, that is in the north. So the idea of Hindutva could be divisive. That was known to Mahatma Gandhi, that was known to Jawaharlal Nehru, that was known to majority of the people, and that is why, despite having a large population of Muslims, considerably large population of Christians, considerably large population of Sikhs, imagine there was a movement called Freedom for Khalistan. Khalistan was to become part of the Punjab and part of Haryana also. They thought that India is not suitable for them. What they require is a Sikh identity, Sikh national identity. And so they wanted Khalistan. If Khalistan was created, many other aspects of Indian identity would have collapsed. You must have read or known, having studied politics, that Soviet Union was the most powerful country after 1917 revolution in Russia. Most powerful country in the world. It could challenge even United States as superpower. It was because of Soviet Union that Second World War, force like Hitler, the force like Nazi was defeated. It was primarily defeated by Red Army supported by the Allied forces of Britain, France and United States. But the main leading force was that of Red Army. That was the power of the Soviet Union. Soviet Union had got something like 25,000 nuclear weapons with them. And yet in 1991, when the system collapsed, when the Soviet system collapsed, Soviet Union disintegrated and became 15 republics. One country which was so powerful that it could challenge United States of America, it could become number one powerful center in the world, and yet it could not control itself, it could not sustain itself, it could not remain integrated despite all the nuclear weapons and all the power in this world. It got disintegrated primarily because the systems became weak. Why systems became weak? Because systems did not have a kind of democratic structure that in India we have. We have survived now for 72 years. But there are tendencies in this country which can lead to even end of India, as Krishan Singh used to call it, or disintegration of India, or Indian disunion. if we do not conduct ourselves in a tolerant manner, in a compatible manner, by taking inclusive approach to society, inclusive approach to life, inclusive approach to globally. You know, Vinoba Bhave, perhaps you don't know, or perhaps you know, Vinoba Bhave was the disciple of Mahatma Gandhi. Actually, he gave the slogan called Jai Jagat the first time, much before globalization, sometime in 1949-50. He gave the slogan Jai Jagat, saying that India is a country, part of the whole world. And nobody should say that Indian culture, Indian civilization, Indian religion, Indian tradition is superior to every other. Because every other society, not only country, every other society, every other culture, every other civilization is rich in its content. There's nothing like superiority in cultures. Nobody can say that Indian culture is superior to, let us say, Japanese culture or Chinese culture or to European culture. Within European, there are so many other cultures. All these cultures finally integrate into world. Hundreds and thousands of people in India, even the Hindi film Bollywood industry, has translated or reworked on Shakespeare's works and made Bollywood films. Hundreds and thousands of writers in China, in Japan, everywhere have used Shakespeare. Similarly, the epic like Ramayana and Mahabharata has been performed all over the world. Ramayana I have seen in Indonesia being performed. Indonesia is primarily a Muslim country. They perform Ramayana brilliantly. In America, there was a performance of Ramayana. So literature, culture, they are all uniting forces. Unfortunately, today we see everybody thinks that his culture or his color or his race or his caste or his religion or his language or his region is superior to the other communities, and therefore there is this tendency of discriminating and undervaluing significance of others. That will bring about the disintegration. That will be the failure of the political system. Now the political system is what the aim. Political system to understand, and particularly when you're writing a journal, when you're writing in a journal, essentially what you're doing is political journalism. Now political journalism is one thing and actual participation in politics another. Many people think that participation in politics means fighting election or becoming a member of the parliament or member of the assembly or member of the corporation. I think that is not the only definition of politics. There are so many NGOs who are working actually for social causes, but the social cause itself is one dimension of politics. Cultural cause itself is another dimension of politics. Economics is a major cause of politics, major dimension of politics. Today, for instance, India is going through the worst phase of economy since independence. It is not only caused by Corona. Economy was going down for last about 6-7 years, and Corona has just come, but Corona has been considered as the final cause of the economic disintegration today. That economic disintegration has potential, if it is not controlled, for political disintegration. And therefore, understanding economics is part of understanding politics. Understanding sociology, that is understanding societies, is also trying to understand politics. Understanding culture, as I said, is understanding politics. We forget that even religion is actually an expression of politics in different words, different concepts, different form. For instance, you must have seen there have been so many religious wars, and people say all Islam is one and Islam is against the rest of the world. But don't forget that there are 54 Islamic countries. They are not one country. There is nothing like Islamistan. There are so many Islamic countries from Sudan, Yemen, UAE, Egypt, Libya, Iraq. They're all Indonesia. They're all Islamic countries in the sense that Islam is in majority or their constitution is Islamic, but they have not been able to unite themselves. Iran and Iraq, Shia and Sunni mainly, they fought a war against each other for 10 years. That means to say that Islam is all one and it is threatening the world stability is, lack of understanding religion, lack of understanding nationalism, lack of understanding politics, lack of understanding systems. It is necessary to understand systems and how they are created, political systems, how they are created, just as how religion is created. And when religion was created, it was perhaps for different purpose of giving peace and tranquility to the people. But actually, it ended up in dividing the people. All religions have actually worked towards dividing people while talking at the same time, talking of peace and uniting the people. Now, it is true that the religion's intentions are genuine, but its applications are not so genuine. Its applications are political and its intentions are ethical. So, to understand politics means to understand the role of religion, to understand the role of caste, to understand the role of community. For instance, till almost 1928, most of the European countries did not have right to women to vote even. There was a big movement, something like for 50 years, women were actually marching on the street to demand right to vote, simple thing. In India, we got the right to vote for women and for everybody who was 21 years and above, now it is 18, 21 years and above, to vote immediately after we got independence. In the very first election, all those boys and girls who were 21 could vote. Now they can vote at the age of 18. All that right to vote equally, that equality of political process, participation in political process was granted by Indian Constitution immediately after independence, which for other countries did not come till very recently. Therefore, it is necessary to understand that our Constitution, which is a creation, our Constitution is a creation of social and political movements which brought freedom. In 1947, when we got freedom, it was a culmination, a crescendo point of so many political processes led by Mahatma Gandhi, particularly Ambedkar for social movements, and so many other processes finally combined together, coalesced together, and we got independence. Therefore, in independence, there were people who fought from various sections of society, poor, rich, rural, urban, men, women, and therefore we have a unique constitution in the world, because our constitution was framed after studying the Russian constitution, after studying the Chinese constitution. Chinese constitution and Chinese communism came in 1949. India got freedom in 1947, but we became republic after having constitution adopted in 1950. So we studied Chinese constitution, we studied Russian constitution, we studied American constitution, we studied European struggle, Chartist movement, and right from Cromwellian movement in the 17th century, we adopted the ideas of democracy. The first public revolt, democratic revolt, was led by Cromwell against monarchy in England, and that we were studying. After Cromwell's movement, after Cromwell's first success, actually monarchy was re-established, but monarchy was constrained. Now in England, there is monarchy. There is no, what you can call, parliamentary democracy supreme. Monarchy is supreme. But that monarchy is supreme only in the sake of name. Monarchy, the monarch, whether it's a queen or king, does not have the right to full govern. In fact, parliament decides what queen should sign. So it is parliament which is superior to queen, but in terms of authority, queen has been given the authority to sign. Just as in India, we have copied that a little. Our Rashtrapati, our president, does not decide any policy. It is the government which decides the policy, and it is parliamentary democracy, parliamentary democratic system. The cabinet sends that proposal to president, and president signs it. If president doesn't agree, he sends it back to the cabinet, cabinet sends it again, and then president has no option but to sign. But the president is like virtually a namesake monarch of India, but that monarchy does not come from dynasty. So the point is, in India, political parties behave in a secular manner. We understand secularism as the foundation of Indian society. The moment we give up secularism, we will disintegrate like Pakistan got disintegrated. Pakistan was one country, East Pakistan, West Pakistan. That was East Bengal and West Punjab and other Balochistan. All they were part of Pakistan in 1947 when they got separate. But they could not actually contain in the name of Islam. So the name of culture cropped up. Bengali language, Bengali culture, Bengali identity began to assert itself, and the Punjabi identity could not tolerate that. So one Islamic part of Pakistan, that is West Pakistan, invaded its own country, East Pakistan. They were also Muslims, and finally the two countries were born, Bangladesh and Pakistan, because religion could not contain the aspirations of people, because religion can never contain, because religion is not always inclusive. Religion's idealism is inclusive, but religion's practice is always exclusive. And therefore, it is necessary to understand that when you talk of politics, You have to talk of culture, you have to talk of religion, you have to talk of language, you have to talk of region, you have to talk of sociology. And political journalism means trying to understand all these aspects. When you write a magazine like this, when you write something on politics, what you are doing essentially is a political commentary. That means you are trying to understand multiple forces that govern you and me, that govern our society, and that have been governing even before we were born, and they will continue to govern even after we are not here on this planet. And therefore, in today's world, the most significant global political issue is not only economics and not only politics, but climate change. It is climate change which is threatening the whole world. In fact, there are scientists, climatologists who say that if climate change is not brought under control in, say, let us 10 or 15 years, it is distinctly possible that it will cause havoc in the world. Because climate is the most important thing. Climate doesn't understand nations. Climate has no religion. Climate has no nation. Climate has no national boundaries. As you see, suddenly everybody is discussing why Maharashtra, for instance, is having much more rain and much more sustained than any time before. They are studying also suddenly why Europe and America are having heat like never before. Then they are studying why so many portions of the Atlantic and the Atlantica on this side, North Pole and South Pole, they are actually getting completely dismantled. They are melting and melting into the Atlantic Sea and therefore creating a new kind of tension. There are reports that country like Maldives will go straight into the sea because the temperature will rise and the waters will rise. And the higher temperature, water increasing, and the country will disappear into the waters. Climate change, the climate itself is going to be a threat to whole world, and you cannot say I am America or I am Russia or I am India and therefore I will consider climate change issue from my country's own perspective. It is not possible because climate does not recognize boundaries of the nations and limitations of culture and religion. So climate is another politics. In fact, the most crucial politics of the day in the world is climatology. And that climate change is directly related to economics. People say that the more economic growth you want, you will naturally pollute the environment. Because you will require industry, you will require cars, you will require petrol, you will require all kinds of things. And therefore, pollution is inevitable. Climate destruction is inevitable. That's what the people who say growth is definitely we want and not question of climate. There are people even in developed countries who say that climate change is not a good idea because it will stop or it will prevent growth. I think we have to think in terms of what Gandhi said. It is not growth is not enough. It is redistribution of the wealth which is created by that growth. Today what we see in the world, there is a lot of growth, tremendous wealth. Huge wealth is generated. Even students like you who are part of the middle class are much happier than your parents were. Your parents, for instance, or perhaps your grandparents, did not have television even if they could afford. Actually, television itself did not exist in India till almost late 1960s. But even when it existed, it was not possible for people to have television. Today, at that time, even to have telephone was considered a rich man's lifestyle. Today, every single child, even 5-year-old child, has a mobile phone and is able to connect to the world all over. That was a luxury once upon a time, lifestyle once upon a time. Today, it has become a necessity. Your whole generation, your entire generation, the student generation, is born and brought up on the WhatsApp university, as some people call it. I think that WhatsApp has tremendous potential for connectivity and as much or more potential for disconnectivity. That WhatsApp and that social media has tremendous potential for destruction, for fake news, and for journalism and for politics. We have to prepare ourselves to fight fake news. Today, the fake news, the irrelevant news, bankrupt news, all that is permanently going on the TV and on WhatsApp, social media, I think is destroying the mind. And therefore, one can say, as somebody has said, that WhatsApp and the social media has more potential to destroy the world than even nuclear bomb. Because social media or the media or the communication will destroy minds. And if minds are destroyed, you don't need nuclear weapons. But again, that social media, understanding social media, dealing with social media, using social media is also politics. So you cannot say, you cannot separate politics from your day-to-day life, total life, whether you are a consumer or a producer, whether you are a buyer or whether you are a seller. Whatever your role may be, whether you are a student or a professor, whether you are actually as a scientist or just manager of scientific organization. Politics is all over. It is policies towards science which are determined politically. Political policy is determined by political classes, and therefore you cannot escape politics. Therefore, I was very happy to learn that you have chosen politics as your theme and you have taken so many aspects of politics. But I would suggest give up cynicism. Unfortunately, cynicism has become an approach towards politics. I will be happy if you develop positive, healthy attitude towards politics and not cynical attitude towards politics. I will further be happy if you join politics. Joining politics is not fighting elections only. Joining politics is joining political process, joining political movements. It could be farmers' movement, which is going on now, or it could be student movement, it could be trade union workers' movement. There are so many issues which people want to fight for, work for, and idealize for. All that is politics. I understand that. Don't remain yourself with the constraints of the magazine that you have created. Grow out of that magazine, grow out of that ideology of just writing and thinking, armchair thinking. Join on the street, join action, because politics is not only thinking and writing, politics means action. If you are doing political journalism, even then it is political action, because political journalism also is a kind of action. So I am happy that you have begun your approach towards politics by starting this magazine. I am sure you will be able to carry it forward to its positive, optimistic, and constructive end, and not to the destructive, cynical end. With those words, I will close my observations and take later on all the questions and answers which you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kumar Ketkar, sir. Your words were wonderful, and I will definitely look up on all the things that you've said. I would really like Akib Mullah, the writer of The Young Print, to tell us about his contribution, outlook, and vision for the magazine.
Before we proceed further, I would like to once again thank our Honorable Chief Guest, Mr. Kumar Ketkar, sir, to be part of this auspicious launch event of our very first edition of the magazine. I would also like to thank all the viewers from different parts of the world to be part of this wonderful event. It should be mentioned that this magazine, which was unveiled by Honorable Mr. Ketkar, was a collective initiative of the students and the faculty members of the MAT Institute of Liberal Arts. It wouldn't be possible to work on the publication of it without the support and guidance of our faculty members. The aim of our quarterly magazines is to provide the upcoming youths a formal platform to showcase their views on different topics that the magazine features. Through our magazines, not only content writers benefit, but we also try to inculcate a healthy practice of reading by including interesting topics that attract young minds. Furthermore, we also accept contents from our readers as well. So anyone who wishes to submit their works can submit through the given guidelines at the end of the magazine, irrespective of which country or background they belong to. Our team filters the content before publishing it in the magazine so that authentic and appropriate content gets published. In this way, our purpose of providing right and appropriate information is fulfilled, and also the readers are provided with amassed information on various topics. As for my contribution towards the edition, I worked on the article named India's Scuffle Against COVID-19. Since the theme of this edition is COVID-19, through this article, I have portrayed the country's struggle against pandemic by going through different political and economical aspects, and also shared my personal experience. I would request you all to kindly go through this brief article in order to feel the experience right from the day one of lockdown. Once again, I thank you all to be part of this event. I pass on the proceedings to Kaustubh, who will provide you with an harbinger of our upcoming editions. Thank you.
Thank you, Akib, for this. Taking on from here, I would again use this opportunity to thank our respected faculties whose support has been crucial for this event to materialize, and also Mr. Kumar Ketkar, sir, for sharing with us his invaluable knowledge. Just before me, as Akib rightly talked about the broad vision of our magazine, we, the students of Amity Institute of Liberal Arts, have the duty and mission to turn that vision into reality. As already mentioned before, this magazine envisions that everyone whose opinions have till now been subjugated can have a credible platform and share them. And this is what will motivate us to carry forward our venture. Our approach will be simple, which is anyone who would like to share their experience or expertise on any subject, which in their opinion can help to solve any particular issue pertaining to our country's progress. Our mission will be based on the philosophy: if others find your opinions non-valuable, we will ensure to find value in it. I would also like to take this opportunity to talk about my featured piece, which is titled Advantage for Indian Incorporative. In just past few months, many things have taken place, which none of us thought would ever happen, be it the months-long lockdown or the economic crisis of this unprecedented level. All this trace its roots to China, our immediate neighbor. And these events have led to a growing resentment towards China among citizens. And this resentment can perfectly be used to encourage Indian companies because over the years, Chinese companies have dominated the Indian market, especially in terms of handsets or digital companies. And as Indian consumers found Chinese products far more efficient and affordable, even the governments were hesitant to discourage them. But with the growing negative perception towards Chinese companies, the government of India has seen an opportunity to limit their presence and encourage Indian companies to fill in the vacuum. Generally, Indian consumers have not preferred Indian company end products as those products are not a matchup to the Chinese one. But with the help of Government of India, these Indian companies too can give a tough competition to the Chinese companies. And it is my opinion that if Indian companies can get a good foothold in Indian market, it will be a big boost towards expanding their presence in other global markets. This is what my broad outline is regarding the piece that has been featured. Before moving further, I would just like to reiterate what Akib just now rightly said, that if anyone in the audience thinks that their opinions need to be highlighted, they can send those write-ups to us as per the submission guidelines, and we will try our best to ensure that it gets published in our further editions. Saying this, I would now hand over to my teammates, Gayatri and Shubham. Over to you.
So thank you for the vision, outlook, and contribution, Akib and Kaustav. Now we begin the question and answer round. So I would like to actually ask the first question to Kumar Ketkar, sir. So, what is your advice for the young aspiring journalists in this nation right now? Like, how would you like to build our careers up?
How would I like to build what?
Our career up. Like,
I don't think, frankly, though it is popular to say, I don't think politics and journalism are career professions. Politics certainly not career profession, and journalism also is not a career profession. But unfortunately today, both are being looked at as career professions. When you say career profession, you have something called success in the career. Success in the career is, for instance, if you start an industry, the success in the industrial career is defined by the industry making big profit, going all over the places, getting good market, getting good products, and getting good recognition. That is quote unquote success. In politics, success is not winning an election. Even after getting completely defeated in the elections or in the electoral process, the success definition of success is different in career, and definition of success is different in politics and sociology. And therefore, I would suggest that don't use the word success for that. Don't use the word career for that, because career would amount to meaning success. It is a kind of understanding and contributing towards society, whether it is journalism or it is politics. You are contributing to the evolution of ideas into society. What is journalism? Journalism is you're not, there is no product. There is no some kind of a soap or a toothpaste. You're writing, and you're writing words, and those words are your products, if at all, if you want to call that way. and they are influencing or inspiring or discouraging the people. So essentially, you are dealing with words, and words cannot come unless there are ideas, and ideas cannot come unless you have creativity in thinking about the word. So don't look at politics and journalism as career. But if it means that you want to become a reporter, then finally editor, which I became, but I never looked at journalism as my career and became editor. I never aspired to become editor. I became editor. But throughout my career, quote unquote career and time as journalist, I went out to the field. I went out to cover droughts and floods. I went to the poorest of the poor farmers in Marathwada and Vidarbha when the farmers were committing suicide. I went to investigate why it is happening so. Similarly, I went when the atrocities against Dalits were committed. Similarly, when the atrocities on communal riots were taking place against Muslims or other communities, I went there on field. Now, nobody was looking at that point of what money I will make, what fame I will make. I was reporting the world around me, or around our country, or around the globe, to the world which had no opportunity to see that. I'll just quote one thing which has happened now in America, George Floyd case, where one black man was killed by police, and the whole country rose in protest against the white racism. Now, that was reported extensively by the media, by journalists. And if journalists had not reported the atrocity on the blacks, perhaps this consciousness could not have come. So, generating consciousness, which is secular, which is liberal, which is inclusive, which is human, and when you generate that consciousness, that is quote unquote success of your career.
Thank you, sir. I would really like Shubham to continue with the questions.
Shubham, before you continue, can you just put the magazine on display for the audience to also have a look at it?
Sure, sir.
Yeah, that's basically. Yeah, you can move forward with the questions.
To begin with, Kumar sir, thank you so much for such an enlightening address for all of us. There are a few aspects that I would like to know your opinion on, since you have covered politics extensively. What do you think? I want to focus on two political parties in specific. One is the Shiv Sena in Maharashtra, and one is the Congress party. What I want to know about the Shiv Sena is post what happened, the debacle post the elections of 2019, the assembly elections of 2019, we saw a transformation in the image of Shiv Sena, or the Shiv Sena that we have seen over so many years. What do you think? What do you make of this transformation that has happened in the Shiv Sena? And is it something that was a conscious decision to move ahead and go in a direction, particularly when they don't have a strong ally or their oldest ally in the BJP together?
Well, actually, your question needs to be looked at with certain perspective. You are very close to Shiv Sena because you are in Mumbai or Maharashtra, and therefore you have seen the change which you consider quite a big transformation in the culture and the politics or style of Shiv Sena. Just tell me or just think, which organization and which party has not undergone a major change and transformation, but which we did not really care for because they were far away. For instance, the Communist Party in the 1920s and 1930s did not think that parliamentary democracy was the crucial institution. Today, in fact, the communists are the vanguard of defending parliamentary democracy. Once upon a time, the BJP, which was born out of RSS, had adopted Gandhian socialism in 1984-1985. They fought the election on the banner of Gandhian socialism, ideology of Gandhian socialism. Again, they moved away at the time of Babri Masjid destruction and became a Hindu party, and today they have become strident Hindutva party. But within the BJP, there are people who feel that should concentrate on the liberal economy, quote unquote, right-wing economy, rather than concentrating on Ram Janmabhoomi or religion. Now, within those forces, sometimes one type of force, for instance, during Vajpayee's time, you did not see so much of the crescendo sloganeering of Hindutva during Vajpayee. He was also BJP. He also came from RSS. At that time, when the Rath Yatra began, Vajpayee did not join Rath Yatra. In fact, Vajpayee used to say that the greatest prime minister India had was Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, whereas today's prime minister does not consider that as the same in the same vein. So every party has changed. Shiv Sena has also changed. Shiv Sena I have seen at the birth. I was there as a journalist. I was just a budding journalist in 1966-67 when Shiv Sena was born. Shiv Sena in 1966 when it was born was a different organization. It actually said that we do not want to participate in politics at all. Politics is dirty, politics is corrupt. We don't want to join politics. Slowly, after about 4 or 5 years, they joined politics. Then they did not want to fight election. Then they started fighting election. Then they considered BJP, at that time it was known as Jan Sangh, was the main political rival because Jan Sangh versus Shiv Sena fought elections almost till 1980. So it was Jan Sangh versus Shiv Sena. Later on, Shiv Sena joined with the BJP, and today Shiv Sena joined in an alliance with NCP and Congress. So Shiv Sena has not changed now. Shiv Sena has been transforming itself. All political parties have transformed themselves. Ultimately, political parties aim not only at the ideals that they profess, but at power, because they think power is the medium of transformation. So for power, they will be able to deal with alliances. For instance, BJP allied with PDP, that is a party in Srinagar, and that PDP leader today, Mehbooba Mufti, is under arrested by the BJP. And they were in alliance in forming a government in Kashmir, PDP and BJP. Similarly, the Trinamool Congress, once upon a time, hated CPM, and even now they hate CPM. But in certain agitations, for instance, on this farmers' agitation, CPM and Trinamool are together. Badal, Punjab, Akali Dal was part of the BJP India alliance for last nearly 25 years. Only today you must have read in the newspaper that they have left the NDA. So like that, political parties involved with social issues, social questions, keep on changing their alliances because ultimately the aim is being credible to your own class, your own people. And Punjabi farmer is looking at Akali Dal as representing them. And Punjabi farmer and Akali Dal therefore feel that aligning with BJP today, NDA today, amounts to anti-farmer line. And therefore they have also shifted. So this keeps on changing. 5 years down the line or perhaps 1 year down the line, we'll have different alliances. After Bihar election again, Bihar election is in November, things will change. Or forget India, in America, many leading Republican leaders are actually deserting Donald Trump because they consider Donald Trump as a dangerous force for America. So, things happen. Shiv Sena is very close to us. So transformation in Shiv Sena we see. But the style of Raj Thackeray, who is also Shiv Sena, of Uddhav Thackeray, who is also Shiv Sena, Balasaheb Thackeray, who actually formed Shiv Sena, is also Shiv Sena. All their styles are different, all their approaches are different, but all their approaches are governed by the quote-unquote present tense. And that present tense determines your political action at that particular point of time. There is nothing permanent in politics. It's a very volatile, politics is a very volatile activity. Constantly vibrant, constantly dynamic, constantly changing. We have to see that whether personal self-interest or the collective corporate self-interest determines action or social good determines action. That we have to see and judge accordingly.
Right. My second question to you was on the Congress party. Since 2014, what we have been seeing, what many people, what many analysts would term it as an existential crisis for the Congress party, given its performance in the last two general elections that we have seen. We've also seen a sense of a division created within the party in terms of factions being created who will support a particular leader. In your analysis, where do you think the Congress party has gone wrong in the last 6 years?
When you say gone wrong, means you are saying electorally gone wrong, right?
Right.
In 2014, Congress party came to 44 seats from their earlier seats in 2009, 206. From 206, they came to 44. And therefore, you think that Congress has suddenly declined. Now, let us look at the BJP. BJP had only 2 seats in 1984-85. Only 2, not 44. Only 2 seats in 1984-85. And 1999, they had 182 seats. And in 2004, again, they were reduced to 118 seats. Brought from 182 to 118 seats. and Congress came to power from absolute very low performance in 1998, 1999 to 2004. They came to power with 145 and later on in 2009, 206 seats. So if you look at success of any party or any leadership on the basis of merely electoral results, then you will be completely misled. That doesn't happen that way. Those who are absolutely zero, for instance, the TRS party in Telangana or Jagan Mohan Reddy's party, they're all new. Just about 7 years ago, nobody had heard a party called AAP. Nobody had heard because party was not there. Party came out of India Against Corruption movement. And that party, when it came, everybody thought it will be wiped out because it has no experience. It has not fought any election. It doesn't have identifiable leader. And yet, within the first election, and when Modi was hugely popular, AAP won 67 seats out of 70 seats in Delhi Assembly. And AAP came to power. 2 years after that, AAP suffered a huge defeat and went back. Again, AAP came last year to power. So, electoral success does not determine the future of political party. You are asking me the future or existential crisis in the future. Every party, every single party and every single leader and every single organization goes through the so-called existential crisis. And that existential crisis is actually overcome by the process, by the events which are not necessarily under your control. For instance, just about a month ago, you and me and many others thought that Sachin Pilot has resigned and will join BJP and perhaps will become Chief Minister on the support of BJP or part of the BJP. What we saw today was Sachin Pilot joined back the same Rahul Gandhi and Congress, whom generally is considered as a negative factor in politics. Rahul Gandhi was considered a negative factor, and everybody was advising all the newspapers to just go to your library and read newspapers after Rajasthan crisis opened up. Everybody was condemning Rahul Gandhi and praising Sachin Pilot. Suddenly things changed. Sachin Pilot met Rahul Gandhi and said he is the leader of the party and I am joining and I am not joining BJP. Now nobody, not a single anchor in the television or not a single editor of any newspaper had predicted that Sachin will go back to Congress and accept and promote the leadership of Rahul Gandhi, who was a very widely condemned, quote unquote, underlined, condemned party leader. So things change, things keep on changing. Narendra Modi in 2002, Atal Bihari Vajpayee himself advised him to resign because such huge riots took place in Gujarat and so many people were killed. So according to him, it was not governance, it was not humanity. This kind of riot is not acceptable, and Vajpayee called it adharma and called Modi a kalank. And later on, Modi continued as Chief Minister and Modi became Prime Minister. So you cannot say that particular person as a leader, particular party as an organization is permanently on a decline. Decline may come, decline may go, but organizations survive, individuals survive, and situations change. Nobody is immortal here. Neither Rahul Gandhi, nor Modi, nor you and me, nobody is immortal. But the society is immortal. Society is immortal, environment around us is immortal, systems are changing and therefore trying to sustain themselves. So all the governance issues are immortal. Governance is required even in a tribal society where there is no government, no state government, no army, no air force, but there is some kind of a governance. That governance is immortal. You, me, political parties, all are permanently in existential crisis. Sometimes you are at the top of power, sometimes at the bottom of the power, but bottom of the power must not demoralize those who are at the bottom, and the top of the power should not make them arrogant as if they are going to be permanently there. Those who are on the top can go down, those who are at the bottom can go up, but that is not also a rule. It can happen, it may not happen.
Right, sir. We'll just take one audience question. We have a question by Shivani. She's asking, sir, why do you think there is an uprise of a capitalist or an elected autocracy around the world, from Boris Johnson to Donald Trump to Narendra Modi?
This is a very good question, but very advanced question in sociology of politics, because this is happening across the country. For instance, in Brazil, in United States, in Hungary, in Turkey, in Russia, and to a certain extent in India, the neoliberal economy is taking step ahead of the so-called left and liberal approach to the political world. That was just about 15, 20 years ago. But this process was happening. And one of the reasons identified is the liberals actually created an atmosphere and where all of us began to take what you can call refuge in semi-idealistic stage, which was not going to be there for permanence. And those people who were hurt by affirmative action for women, for Dalits, for Muslim, for underprivileged, for blacks in America, for Hispanics in America, the white supremacists were hurt by that process, and therefore they began to mobilize. Similarly, in India and elsewhere, those who actually felt hurt by the affirmative action began to mobilize with tremendous vengeance and revenge, and therefore they began to invade the idea of liberalism all over the world. Today, the idea of liberalism is actually attacked from all corners. But the fact is, those who are attacking the idea of liberalism, whether in India or in US or in UK, they are not going to sustain because they don't have any what you can call iconic ideal before them. Their only point is hate politics. Trump is having hate politics. Modi is having hate politics. Boris Johnson is having hate politics. That hate politics cannot lead you anywhere. For some time, hate politics will win. So sometime hate politics will determine and call the shots all over the world. But that does not mean, because hate politics does not have an iconic, idealistic, global agenda. None of these hate politicians ever talk, ever, or if they talk absolutely against it, is climate change. Or they don't talk against the discrimination. They don't talk about the inequalities. Actually, the biggest question in America today, which the movement called 99 versus 1 actually reflected, was inequality. Inequality and discrimination and climate change are the crucial aspects of social living. And they are those who want to sustain the status quo or going back to the reactionary way of getting that power again, naturally will fight back. Today, in that fight, their vengeance, their revenge has to a certain extent won. And they have defeated the liberal idea, but they don't have any idea for which they are working. They are working out of vengeance. So at present, they have been able to capture the imagination of a section of the people and come to power on this particular point of hate. That doesn't mean it will last long, but the question is correct.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. I think we are running out of time now. I would now like to invite Siddharth sir to give the vote of thanks.
All right. It was indeed a very good session. I would take this opportunity to thank Kumar Ketkar sir on behalf of our faculties and students from Amity Institute of Liberal Arts for joining us for this launch event of the Young Imprint. It has been a fabulous and a very intriguing session for all of us. Sir, your words and observation have really enlightened and encouraged our students to work towards a new direction of deliberative discourse and creative thinking. Today, we have taken a step towards creating an environment of a much vibrant discourse that is more progressive towards a democratic, deliberative understanding of the society, and also towards taking a step towards a constructive thinking from the point of view of youth. I take this opportunity to also thank our director, Dr. Alka Parekh ma'am, to give encouragement and motivation to our students and give strength to our students to work in this direction of progressive thinking. Am I audible? Yes. And at the same time, I also take this opportunity to thank the audience and the dignitaries and the faculties for joining us for this session. This moment also calls for me to thank some special mentions of students who have taken an extra effort in compiling this final outlay of the magazine. Shubham, for specific, has worked day and night for compiling this outlay of the digital content of the magazine. Gayatri, Ananya, Marina, Kaustuv, Akib, all of them, Ashni and Suhina, everyone have taken an extra effort in compiling this outlay of the magazine. And I look forward for the future edition. Very soon we'll be sharing more details about it. And the one which has been launched today will be shared with all of you through mailers, through different platforms of social media. And we hope that more contributions come in future from different other schools as well, and also from other university students who have joined us from other universities and colleges are also welcome to contribute in this magazine. It's a endeavor that we look forward to create a vibrant environment within the society. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. Thank you, Kumar Ketkar sir, once again.
Thank you very much. I was delighted to be in your company, though virtual company. And
Right,
I'm
sir.
thankful and wish Young Imprint and the team and all of you personally and collectively great future.